Do an intro or something.
Yeah, go for it, man.
All right, thanks for tuning in to this Twitter space and I guess collab episode of Endeavour News and Backbenchers, I suppose. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm Hector, co-host of Endeavour News, along with Gilbert, the other co-host of Endeavour News.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Hope you're going well.
And we're here with John Lawson. How you doing, mate?
Very well, thank you, and I appreciate the invite to come on the show. And likewise, I'm glad you could join me on this collab episode of Backbench Drivers.
Yeah, so
Main.
Backbench Drivers slash Endeavour News. So there we
That's it.
go. All right,
Awesome.
Yeah,
well
we've
then,
been
who?
trying to make this happen for a long time. We mentioned that a couple of moments ago, but it's just it kept on falling through. I guess we've sort of started around the same time. That's why I thought it would be a great collaboration to happen.
Hmm?
And obviously, I mean, there's not much going on in terms of cross Tasman podcasts or content creation, but we're so close, and our situations are such that so similar in terms of politics that it sort of just seems natural to me.
Oh yeah, we should be doing like so much more of this kind of stuff since we are, yeah, inextricably linked, and a lot of the problems we face, face actually arguably at a much greater scale. So I mean, yeah, I think it's like to get a regular thing like this going. I think would be very healthy and good for the international nationalist scene. Uh,
Mm.
and like I think we just need to keep talking, keep a community going, and have this as some sort of decentralized central hub of nationalists all around the world. And yeah, because one of the things our enemies do, which a lot of people do not do, is they keep talking and they keep the conversation rolling. You just gotta have that communication constantly flowing to make sure everybody's uh, minds are awake and aware and focused on what we're doing. So I mean, this is a podcast of many to come. I'm sure. Hector, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to do this Trans Tasman episode for a little while. I will say there used to be Dewey DeBoer and Tim Wilms, like two friends of the show, used to do a collab, but I don't know what happened to that. It sort of fell through. So
Huh.
Mm.
Hmm.
I guess we'll just have to collaborate where we can. It's good to do a Trans Tasman talk. Yeah, we've talked to Tim, we've talked to um,
Gimpsy.
yeah Gimpsy, we've talked to Blair Cottrell. So there's been a little bit, but it should be a much more regular thing.
Wilms. Yeah.
As a side note, I've been impressed by the caliber of guests you guys have been able to get on the show. I mean, you've had Arvol, you've had Blair. I mean, these guys are legends. They're very well known around the world, and you guys are hosting them on your little New Zealand news
Yeah,
show.
it's
I
sort of
mean,
interesting.
you're the same size as me. I'm calling you little, just a little jab in the ribs. But no, you guys are doing well for yourselves. Very impressive.
Yeah,
Cheers, man.
yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
It's sort of interesting. You just ask, and you'll be surprising the amount of people just say, "Yeah, I'll
I
jump on."
agree. Yeah,
Mm.
same with me. I mean, I started this out, and I thought to myself, has anyone ever like we assume that we're locked out of various spaces either due to our geographic position, Australia, no one's interested in Australian politics or New Zealander politics, or alternatively, sometimes you'll talk to people who are more establishment, and you'll think they'll never come and discuss, they'll think we're too far out there. But asking that you shall receive, knocking the door will be open to you is oftentimes proven true just by asking people. And it's impressive what what other nationalist groups have done as well. I mean, uh, what comes to mind is the British Australian community. They've had collaborations with the Libertarian Party. They've had collaborations with other alternative people like the Australian Monarchist Society. So these are fairly mainstream organisations that are collaborating with an openly identitarian, pro-white organisation, and I see them in chat listening along the British Australian community account. And I mean, they've been doing great work. It's just amazing what can be accomplished, I think, even at such a small scale, and hopefully we'll go on to much bigger things in short order.
I
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is, ask and you shall receive, and it's like we have everything there. We have all the tools and resources and manpower. I mean, we've got a lot of manpower and a lot of potential at that. Uh, Only needs to be tapped into the right way. But yeah, I mean, you're saying like the libertarians and monarchists and all these different things. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody is sort of seeing the same thing now, and they recognize how like terrible how awful it is. So it's like no matter what blend of whatever you are, it's we're all noticing the same thing, and it's just so like but for lack of a better word, it's just so toxic that people are all kind of putting their shields up in defense of all this kind of just mental illness and nonsense. So yeah, it's really, I mean, the field is ours. I mean, we've just got to pick up what's there for us and just go with it really. So I mean, yeah, we should be going full steam ahead, and I guess to lunge straight into our first topic with the the Maori. Should we start with that, Hector and John? What do you guys, the chimp out in Parliament? Should we start
I'm
with
happy
that?
for it. You guys can give some context to it, and then I can give a little bit of commentary from across in Australia.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hector, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so basically, you have this bill introduced by the ACT Party in Parliament, which is basically the Liberal Libertarian Party, I guess you'd say, Libertarian Party. So they introduced a bill that goes, okay, we have the Waitangi Tribunal, and basically the Waitangi Tribunal basically has like free reign to make decisions on basically anything that apparently affects Maori without any sort of democratic oversight or limits. So a lot of that bill is like, okay, let's make sure that the people that are actually elected to Parliament on behalf of the people of New Zealand actually have power over these, unelected judges. So that's sort of the big one. And that's basically what the bill's about. It's basically like setting terms of what the treaty actually means, because at the moment it just means this panel of judges could just do whatever they want, and basically most of the time that means just giving like money to marry iwis in groups all the time, and people are starting to get a bit sick of it. So that's why that's brought in, and of course because the Gibbs are about to get cut off. You have the Maori Party literally chimping out in Parliament, and then you have
Mm.
like they have like the hokey protests or whatever they were at the front of the Parliament steps. It's all pretty silly, really, but
Mm.
it's basically just like a massive backlash by like the libertarians threatening to turn off the infinite Gibbs for these Maori organizations. And it's just sort of interesting how that evolved over the last month or so.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
do they constantly do this sort of thing? Like, there was a meme going around about how the regular New Zealand politicians are just sick of constantly being huckered every time they do anything. Is this something that happens often? Are you always dealing with it, or is this actually a bit of a standout episode?
It's fairly new. It's the Maori Party's had like a bit of a resurgency lately because back in 2020 they only had one seat in Parliament. Now they've got about six, so they've had a
Mm,
bit of a resurgency, and they sort of got way more uppity lately, and started like spazzing out every time someone does something they don't like. So
mm,
it's
But
it's semi new, at least in Parliament. But this is like protesters have been doing this for years, for like decades. But in
mm.
Parliament itself, it's somewhat new.
what John is right in the way that like anything happens, like if a Maori person stubs their toe, like they'll just throw a haka. They'll just like organize a haka. Like yeah, if their I don't know their fries aren't salty enough at McDonald's, they'll like organize a haka outside McDonald's. Like John is kind of right. Like he is right about that. It's like pretty much anything bad happens that they feel that like they can complain about, and some way like they view it as white people are in some way like responsible. They'll yeah, it's pretty much just huckers galore, like non-stop. And like if there's not enough KFC or they run out of KFC, then yeah, it's a hucker. Like it is kind of that ridiculous in our country, and it's like it's just gotten to the point where people are just like, even New Zealanders who are like a very sort of they're kind of like a bit of without sounding too exaggerated. They're sort of like a demure, maybe friendly, kind of chilled out kind of people. And but it's gotten to the point where like they're having these like regular chimp outs so often that it's just like even the most milquetoast of New Zealanders are seeing this and just going like, oh my goodness, like what? Look at what's happened. Like that who's the big boy, the thick boy in Parliament?
Oh, the soy boy guy. Yeah,
No,
I forgot. Oh, which one?
Graham Robertson, the
Oh,
big,
that big boy.
yeah, the yeah, the thick boy. He Yeah, even he, like, as an example, just was like rolling his eyes when they just when she ripped a piece of paper and like was
Yeah.
probably like her receipt from KFC. Like that's how that's probably like that's how big the receipt was. And she was like, and Mari, she was saying like,
Well, it's the
oh,
most meaningful document she has. It really was a big sacrifice for.
yeah, yeah, she was saying it, Mari. Why didn't the white man fund my KFC receipt?
It's a sacred document.
Yeah.
You got it, man. You got it. Yeah, Hector.
Oh, well, I mean, you just look, it's not that far off, eh? Like, a lot of these, Maori NGOs and iwis, like, the stuff they're funding base might as well just be, like, KFC, like, subsidized. Because it's all just, like, usually just nonsense anyway. So,
So what do they actually want? Are they using it for cultural warfare, in the same way that,
yeah,
for example, Aboriginals here basically get funded to the tune of thousands of dollars to do welcome to country and all of these various things. They'll do smoking ceremony over the new bridge that was constructed by the white man. And so they're getting paid to do these sorts of things. At the same time, they're also getting paid for their welfare and various other things. What side of it is the Gibbs falling in New Zealand?
there is some cultural stuff, but a lot of it is actually just, like, plain old, like, cold hard cash.
Okay.
Like, they want money to buy land. They want money to, buy livestock and trees and put in their own pockets and investment funds, especially these iwi leaders. So a lot of it is basically just like rot, where these organizations, NGOs, and tribes just want to like milk as much as they possibly can off the government. And the Waitangi Tribunal is how that happens because they make all the rulings, and basically 100% of the time it favors the tribes and NGOs over the elected government of New Zealand.
Well, can I ask as a bit of a sidebar? Um, in Australia, because there are so many benefits to being Aboriginal, a lot of people with very marginal Aboriginal ancestry have begun identifying as full-blooded Aboriginals, and that's shown up in our census from a ballooning Aboriginal population, supposedly. And there's always these jokes about very, white guys with freckles claiming that they're part of the tribe, they're Aboriginal. Is this happening in New Zealand? People that are very only minority Maori, are they suddenly claiming Maori ancestry for the sake of getting in on the cash, or what's the situation with that?
Yeah, that's basically exactly what happens here as well. So, people with marginal Maori ancestry, we're talking like less than 10%.
Yeah.
Like David Seymour himself, like the guy that introduced the bill, claims he's like 10% Maori and part of some tribe as well. So,
Okay.
which is sort of ironic. And this is like obviously a white man.
Yeah.
I knew a woman who was like, she's like 3% Maori. Like she has like some Maori lineage off somewhere in the Wops, and this was many years ago. She got a whole roof done, like for like really cheap, like a huge discount for like some sort of like initiative, community Maori, leftist, bongo wongo, whatever you want to call it. It's some nonsense, and she got like a whole new roof on her house.
Well, let
Done.
me say, in defense of her, the Maoris did invent solar panels and modern things. So this is really only what you're only giving back to them what the white man took away to begin with. So
Fair enough.
you got to give it to them.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of like strange stuff like that. All these initiatives that you and schemes that you just don't really you aren't aware of that they all kind of buy into, and they're very like coddled and kept kind of like it's sort of like a kindergarten for them or something in a lot of ways here. I don't think that's much of an exaggeration to say that, really. Hector, what do you think about that? Like, it is kind of like a bit of a daycare for Maori in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I mean, most white liberals, leftists, communists, whatever you want to call them, just see like minorities and brown people as basically these people with absolutely no agency that need to be like coddled. So that's pretty much the same
In
everywhere.
that way, they're kind of true in a sense. Well, especially more in the Aboriginal context, because they kind of are very helpless. I don't mean that to like demean Aboriginals or anything like that, but they live in like these parts of Australia that just have no supplies of anything. And if people aren't constantly donating to them, they won't send their kids to school. They won't have any medical supplies. So they really do live at the government's teeth. So in a way, they're kind of diagnosing the situation more realistically than the conservatives that say, we're all equal. Martin Luther King conservatism, if they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, then they would be just that, would have doctors who are Aboriginal. I mean, that's not really realistic. So, you guys are on YouTube, right? So I'll just be careful with what I say. But yeah, so I mean, in a way, the leftists are kind of more realistic in that if we do want to assist those minorities living in our country, which is, I wouldn't say, a not noble goal. I mean, we don't want parts of our countries to be full of people that are just living in terrible poverty, that are suffering, even if you don't necessarily really relate to them very much, which I'm sure many people on our side of politics don't. I personally don't have much connection to them in my everyday life, Aboriginals, that is. But nonetheless, I mean, if we do, the left is kind of right in that we do kind of need to constantly help them up, but we should just be honest about it, would be my critique of their stance, is that sure, they're not going to ever be able to really reach our standards, for example, of white people or of Asians or of other various minorities in our countries. That's sort of okay. We just have to accept it as it is because it's not really going to change. What are your guys' take on that?
Yeah, I think I'd like to give my take. It's a bit more lengthy. Like I definitely see where you're coming from, but I think I'd like Hector to go first because I think I might be a little bit more lengthy. So Hector, do you want to say something about that or?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're struggling in life, you've already got the welfare system. It's just the Maori rot on top of that. I mean, a lot of the time, again, it's these big iwis trying to do these projects to enrich themselves. A lot of the time, they want more land, they want money for their own pocket.
Well, yeah, no, I wouldn't be really in favor of that. I don't like them constantly taking more land. I don't know if you guys have this, but the Aboriginals here are constantly claiming more and more of Australia's tribal land.
We have that, yes.
You have the same thing. Like, I'm not in favor of that. And I would say, basically just give them the welfare that anyone that is struggling would also get, except we'll expect them to be accepting that welfare in greater proportions. Now, we don't really need to constantly be having a cultural revolution because they're receiving the grants in greater proportion or going to prison at greater proportions either. We sort of just need to accept that as it is and realize it's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you got the same thing. I mean, in New Zealand as well, Maoris are vastly overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So
as they are over here, thanks, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries,
yeah,
man.
funny that.
We'll keep them coming.
Yeah, so
no jokes.
But,
yeah, go.
You're like the Israel to Australia. You want to send us the African refugees because we don't want them.
But anyways, so
your YouTube's getting cooked. Sorry, I'll calm down.
No,
that was a joke. That was a joke.
I'm sure you guys can find something to do with them. I mean, come on, There's UFC. There's
you guys can use the same arguments everyone uses. Oh, you've got a big country. You can fit them in. Not noting that it's all 90% desert with no water.
Yeah, well, I mean. True. It just sort of is what it is. It comes with the territory of having a free movement of people between Australia and New Zealand. We're just sort of, I mean, we're just sort of lucky that like the Aborigines in Australia don't have any reason to come here because that would be a pretty big problem as well. But anyways, so yeah, I mean, basically you've got a system. I mean, the part of it is, I mean, there's the actual bill itself, which basically wants to put limits on what the Waitangi Tribunal can do and how much they can rule and how much rulings they can make that contradict the elected government of New Zealand. That's sort of what's actually in the bill itself. But then you do have the greater cultural sort of zeitgeist above it, where you've got these Maori NGOs, iwis, the Maori Party, like going, hey, no white man, they colonized us and took all our shit. And it's sort of like, well, I mean, before we got here, you guys were just sort of killing and eating each other. So, I mean, it's sort of like objectively a vast improvement of what happened in Maori society post-colonialism. So, I mean, you've got the actual legislation, then you've got like the culture war above it, and it sort of is, a bit of a battle on both.
Yeah, if you on that, like if you look back to the history of you look back at the historical like documentation, it is like what a surprise, right? It is very violent and it was a very brutal time, like a lot of slavery, cannibalism, all kinds of horrible stuff.
I mean,
So stuff that
genocide, like literal
yeah,
genocide.
literal genocide of other tribes. Like it's
Was that the
horrible.
Mariori, or am I
Yeah,
pronouncing
that's
that
All of
correct?
that, but even intertribal conflict,
Mm,
just
like
completely wiping out these other tribes, like to the man.
women, children, like really, really violent, really brutal stuff. Like
mm,
something, and you read about it, it's like far out. Why? I think like why would you even want to go there? But that was the bravery of some people back then, or maybe they didn't know any better. But like it's pretty like yeah, it is pretty freaky to. I actually read some Australian stuff of like British. I think they were like French documentation of I think it was Papua New Guinea and Australia, and the stuff that they saw or that they experienced as well was just like yeah, very freaky, like stuff that you couldn't even one couldn't even like imagine, in people's worst nightmares. So when I read it, I was just like, holy crap! Like in a way, it's kind of like no wonder they don't talk about it because it's so the reality of what happened back then was so horrible.
mm.
But yeah, it's like walking back a few steps, like we were talking about. What was that? Yeah, our sort of our takes on basically what's going on here, and a big thing about like how to interact with them and stuff like that. There is like healthier alternatives to explore, in which we can coexist. I believe there is sort of an optimal level of interacting with people, and it's not all doom and gloom. As John and Hector, you were saying, it's like things actually need to be like equal. That very roughly what you're saying, instead of them just being like handed platters of KFC like with a silver spoon in their mouth. Oh, unironically, right? A silver spoon in their mouth. But like it's like yeah, a thing that we need to also I think is important to acknowledge is that there's a very strong communist element, or not even an element, like a basis for this. I mean, everything that Paddy Murray is, which is like the Maori Party and the banner that they rally themselves under with the flag, is I mean this is like a Marxist group, and in their speech and in their behavior, they behave like one. So people need to understand that while it's good to go like okay we need to work together, and we need to be cognizant that people are different, and but we need to hold like a the same standard, which is fair enough, right? Which is kind of what we're all kind of getting at here. But at the same time, like these people, and I'm sure the same probably is the same over in Australia. There's this very heavy Marxist bent, and amongst communists, it's like they're not interested in reasoning, they're not interested in peace, love, and understanding. The whole history of communism is basically that of doing power and character assassination and threats and all these kinds of things, and kind of covert stuff that's all really nasty and really harsh, and that's sort of the things that they kind of are that they're trying to come about. So and that's very much the way that they behave. I believe Hector was Kiri Allen, and members of the Party Maori were associated with that terrorist group, Uruwera? Is that right?
What's this?
Oh, there's like a communist, anti-fascist, um, sort of Maori, to Uruwera. It's like a sort of it was
Yeah,
sort of like the
it's
terrorist. Oh yeah,
basically like some like Maoris trying to start up like the Maori version of the IRA, talking about like shooting police
That's
officers and farmers,
crazy.
and they essentially got a slap on the wrist because they're brown, even though they attempted to set up like a terrorist organization. So it's sort of interesting to look into, and you look at some of like the rhetoric of some of the leaders. Like I think his name is like what is it, Rangi like Takuma or something. And the guy was like threatening to kill cops, kill white farmers, and kill trader Maori, which is sort of interesting. But these people essentially got like a slap on the wrist because they're brown and apparently not responsible for their actions or something.
yeah, pretty much. Oh, sorry, I think I just muted I'll try unmute him. Oh, sorry. Are you back, John? Oh, my bad. Hector, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry. I think I just muted John, but I don't know how to unmute him. Is John, are you there, pal? Okay, I think we may have just lost John. Message me if you can, John. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole thing with that is yeah, that thing went on for a while. I think there's still a degree to which they exist or inhabit that sort of current of society. Yeah, they got off with a slap on the wrist, and yeah, none of it was given the sort of attention that it deserves. So I'll just see if I can get John back. But Victor, do you want to maybe carry this a bit longer while I try to figure out how to get John back?
Yeah. So basically, like we said before, there is the actual bill itself, which is, it's a fairly reasonable bill. There's a reason why the ACT Party wanted to bring it to Parliament. It gives this panel of unelected judges essentially limits of what they can and can't do, and gives the Parliament like power to override these judges if there's a popular mandate, which at the moment there essentially isn't. So there is that. Do we have John back?
Hey, am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back, man.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I guess it disconnected.
Oh, okay. I thought I muted you or something like that.
Well, I think that might be to do with it, but I'm not touching my phone as I was driving. I thought you guys could hear me for a second, but anyway.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So,
So,
okay.
well,
Yeah,
anyways,
go
I
ahead.
think that sort of like covers that topic. Should we get more into the Aussie topics, which would be, the misinformation and disinformation bill that's been in the news recently? Would you like to talk about that a little bit, John?
Sure, yeah, we can jump to that. Yeah, I have some other questions about New Zealand stuff, but will we come back to the topics on that later on? Do you reckon?
Yeah, we can come back to that.
Why not? Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. Well, in that case, we can jump to the story about the misinfo disinfo bill. So this is for. I'll begin where I sort of begin. For people like myself who sort of just take a lot of conservative presuppositions as given, just as common sense, the idea that somebody would try to legislate so-called hate speech and try to ban it or regulate it seems absolutely absurd to me because you grow up, you watch Ben Shapiro, you watch Jordan Peterson, you watch these sorts of things, and you grow past them. But I mean, they do make some good points about freedom of speech being fairly necessary, especially in a time like this where dissent is punished or very much discouraged by governments, by private companies, and so. When you imbibe all of these sorts of ideas about free speech being so necessary, especially in the West, and then you have the Labor Party of Australia come along and they say that we need a central committee within the government to force companies, private social media companies, to regulate what is allowed on their platforms in accordance with guidelines that the government lays out. And if they fail to comply, they will be fined up to 5% of their revenue, I think, per year, which is just astounding. Um,
Oh.
so you hear this sort of thing. It's absolutely radical. But for most of the Australian population, I think that there is a great idea that the government is supposed to keep them safe or something like that. There's a very much a how do you say it? A
Yeah,
mollycoddling sort of attitude. Yeah, that the public has. They don't think that we should be given full ability to speak, to communicate about politics. And so, for that reason, I was actually dubious as to whether something like this would be, argued against, even by our mainstream Conservative Party. Mind you, it was our Conservative Party that has been responsible for various other anti-speech sort of bills recently, and I'll get to that in a moment. But uh, nonetheless, I was actually happily surprised when the bill was basically defeated in the Senate recently because various independents refused to endorse it. That was a massive calling campaign from a lot of people from our side of politics, a lot of conservatives, basically calling up these independents in the Senate and saying, you got to oppose this. This is not going to benefit anyone. And I think rightfully so, a lot of the independents who have some more controversial views, usually from the left, mind you. So we've got the independent Muslim candidate Fatima Payman, who recently left the Labour Party over the Palestine issue because Labour was not opposing Israel forcefully enough. And then there was also Lydia Thorpe, who left the Greens because I guess they aren't radical enough, which is, if you guys are familiar with the Greens Party at all, they're the most far left body that's actually elected within Australia. They're radical on all social issues basically, but she didn't think they went far enough. I think on Aboriginal issues particularly, and so she's an independent. There were some others as well that are a bit more mainstream, and I think rightfully so. Those more radical senators saw that censoring speech online was going to negatively affect them, especially in terms of issues like the Israel issue, which is controversial, I'd say, across both segments of politics, the centre right and the centre left. So they were opposed to it. The coalition, our conservative, liberal, and national coalition, they were opposed to it as well. And so for that reason, it got defeated. It was actually withdrawn by Albanese, and it didn't make it through, thankfully. So what that bill would have allowed the government to do is it would have allowed basically an unelected bureaucrat to set standards, quote unquote, which would have to then be complied with by the social media companies. Allegedly, and this is included within the bill, the e-safety commissioner would not have been able to target specific posts for taking down, but needless to say, if she saw a specific post which didn't meet the standards, she could then, I guess, just alter the standard across the board and be even more harsh and force these social media companies to comply. So it was absolutely astounding to me that something that's just blatantly targeted at political opposition was put up and actually looked like it was going to gain some support. And I'm so glad that it was knocked down, because it would have made political dissent in this country so difficult. And actually, further to that, it would have made it difficult across the whole world, because they were trying to impose these standards on global social media companies. Well, they're usually located in America. Nonetheless, they're used by users all around the world to communicate about politics and more mundane things as well. But obviously, this would have targeted political speech more than anything else. Of course, it also claimed to also try to censor, the usual stuff like violent content and all of that, which I guess is already prohibited on platforms. So I don't know if that's a real pretext.
Excuse, maybe.
Not an excuse, no.
Yeah.
So of course that was knocked down. Now I wrote an article and I said, well, it looks like this bill is going to be defeated, but we can't let our guard down. There were 3 other bills also put forward by Labor, and we actually haven't seen the details very much for these other 3. But one of them is the under 16s ban, which seeks to ban kids under the age of 16 from using social media. And I'll go into that a little bit in a moment. There was also a hate speech bill, which seeks to make that harder, hate speech harder. And then there's a prohibited symbols bill as well. Sorry, my bad. The prohibited symbols bill is the same one as the hate speech. And then there's also an anti-doxing law, which I'll explain a bit of the backstory on that. But I'll let you guys jump in on the misinformation bill before I go into those other 3. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any reason why you might support a disinfo bill? I can't imagine there is.
Yeah, not really, but it is sort of interesting there because it basically was shot down in the Senate, basically barely. Like it had just enough people that opposed it in the Senate to block it, which was some independents, the National Liberal Coalition, One Nation, and the Greens, which also voted against it because again, there was potential issues there that they would have thought that pro-Palestine rhetoric would have been censored along with all other rhetoric, which is probably true. It probably would have.
We have good reason to believe that would have been the case as well, just judging on people who supported a lot of these recent bills.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting there that the sort of the pro-Israel push that's been pushed in Australia by the Israel lobby and other lobbies has basically turned the Greens against the bill that they probably would have voted for. So
yeah, 100%.
It's interesting there, but I have a feeling that because that one passed, that one didn't pass. It sounds like these other ones are much more likely to pass, especially like the hate speech one, because obviously the Greens are going to vote for a hate speech bill. The coalition might be like cucked enough to do it. So I mean, I don't think unfortunately there's not going to be enough opposition to that, which again would just censor political speech. So,
Mm.
what are your thoughts on it, Gil? Before we get talk about the other bills?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would just say that just from a completely different angle, like I think there's, from what I can see, I mean, Australians have really been really clamped down on hard, like especially given the COVID lockdown thing, like they came down on Australians especially hard, and I think I understand that why, because Australians to me seem to be one of the more rebellious people on the planet. You know, a race unto themselves, which I respect immensely. By the way, I think that's awesome. You know, that's truly a sign of people with agency and with uh, you know, with courage, basically, and it's a really great thing to see. Whereas I noticed New Zealanders kind of reacted to it very differently, which is interesting considering, you know, we're not so far away. Very different environments, yes, but yeah, we're not so far away. But I just thought it was interesting how that kind of works. But yeah, I think that it is very interesting that that they have come down, in my view, exceptionally hard on Australians, and that's like back to my other point in the other topic we were discussing. Like these far left lunatics, they don't respond to reason or, you know, calm, rational discourse and common understanding. That's not what they're about, and that's why conservatives and like free speech activists and people who are genuinely interested in, coming to some common understanding about things. That's why it's work, and that's what the right wing and just, interest in political figures need to understand immediately. That this is like, it's a literal battle of power.
Now, just to add, John, is there any chance you could mute your mic when you're not talking? We're getting a lot of feedback.
Please there. I could try. All right, 1 second. Let me try.
Yeah. Okay.
No worries. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is the kind of game that we're dealing with that I don't think people understand yet, and that does really have consequences if we've got the wrong tech, the wrong strategy, with this game that is, political, it's cultural, it's, it's all kinds of things. It's not, we're not going to be as effective, and we're gonna, lose all the time against these people who are very radical and very motivated and very single-minded. So we have to match that with that same sort of severity that the far left employs in their own tactics and strategy. So that's something that I really want to impress upon our viewers, is that these people are not nice. They're very nasty, and they're only concerned with attaining power and no kind of appeals of reason or sympathy or logic is really going to turn them either way. They don't have, they're very much an amoral people usually. So that's like this is a big, and that goes like with like obviously, as you were saying, John, and as we probably are all thinking, this is a big shock. Like how could you be so vulgar in your display of power? But these are the kinds of people we're dealing with. That they are very serious about this kind of stuff, and it's even though it's like shot down, and we had a lot of weird stuff, crazy stuff shot down in New Zealand. It's like it's pretty alarming that it's even getting this far, that it's actually being passed through Parliament. But I mean, this is what it is, guys. Like we need to become politically involved in some way. Otherwise, I mean, it's just going to get worse, and that's all I really have to say about that. Did you guys want to build on that, or have anything else to say with this?
Yeah, well, essentially, I mean, it's something that's happening in a lot of Western nations. Australia and I think the UK are sort of the two main ones at the moment. That as there's become more and more opposition to, global liberalism, globalism, mass migration, instead of, actually, the elected government, actually heeding some of the concerns that the voting public has, They just are going to get more and more tyrannical. And it's sort of in Australia and the UK, it's like that's sort of the path they've chosen. Instead of actually, maybe listening to the voters and some of their concerns for once, they just want to get more and more, crack down more and more on dissidents because as a society, as, standards of living are dropping, as you have more and more people coming into your country undeservedly and competing for resources such as like housing and labor, that more people are going to be unhappy instead of actually maybe listening to them. They're just going to go, okay, yeah, if you say stuff like that, yeah, you're going to get fined. You go to jail for a month. You get your social media taken off you, that sort of thing. So unfortunately, it's just sort of the path that Australia and the UK have taken, and unless they have like a massive change of government, and there it doesn't seem like these will be reversed. I mean, I think you just have to like push hard. I mean, there is some opposition coming from the Liberals, but I think like the Australians actually need to like just stop being stupid for once and like stop voting for the like Labor Party and pressure the Liberal Party to actually reverse some of these laws that are obviously tyrannical. But I don't know, maybe that's a pipe dream, but unfortunately that seems to be the path that Australia is taking, and it will probably get worse and worse, unfortunately, over the coming years and decades.
Well, what does the left do? They organize, right? They organize into groups, and I actually really don't think that, unlike the left, that the right does not have all these groups, right? All these networks and organizations and clubs and groups and stuff. Whereas the left has just like a never ending. And then you even have foreign interest groups from Israel, from China, from even really random places that also are left wing in nature, which seek only to extract what they can in favor of whatever country they're from. Especially the most popular being India, the CCP, and and maybe in America, Israel, maybe less so in NZ and Australia, probably a lot less so. But yeah, it's like the one thing is, all the our detractors or people who are not aligned with us maybe at all, they all have their networks and people they know, and they know someone in a big corporation and someone in this place. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like wherever we are, wherever we are, um, you know, if you're a nationalist, like we just need to organize with sensible, smart, good, normal people who have their wits about them, and and who can just organize to do something. I mean, we've seen the pro-Palestine protests, we've seen the BLM, we've seen the pro-Israel protests, we've seen all of it, but like it's rarely do we ever see people who are I guess, protesting for or are grouping together in support of their own sort of grassroots, nation or people's interests. So I mean, it's yeah, or without of course. We have the more lurid examples of such displays of of supposed grassroots nationalism, but I'm talking more something that would perhaps appeal to a greater majority of people, be it New Zealanders or Australians. So so I think like something like Project 2025, what Airvol suggests, having schools, to educate people in the system to get them sort of I guess, professionally solvent, especially when it comes to the environment or the field of government and government mechanisms. Then that's really kind of the ticket. And Project 2025, albeit they're not going to assume any positions in higher sort of levels in the cabinet or in government and Trump's administration, they're still there, and there's a pool of them welling up and the political scene in America, in spite of them being walled off at every direction. They're still there, and there's all kinds of data and signs to show that this kind of politics is growing amongst the youth in particular. So that's something to consider. A Project 2025, what Airvol suggests, schools, and this is sort of the start. But sorry about the tangent. John, do you want to go, or Hector, do you want to comment, or
Uh, oh yeah, you go, John.
you go, John?
Oh well, I agree with all that. Those solutions, I think that that's very practical. We need to start thinking about the long term, how we're going to undo these various programs. And I guess just to bring a bookend to the topic of the misinfo bill specifically, none of this is achievable unless we're able to freely communicate our political ideas, because that's how they spread. I mean, that maybe that sounds redundant, but that is how that we can actually convince people of our beliefs. That's how we can grow more people dedicated to political struggle to bring about better conditions in our countries, to bring about nationalism, sovereignty, the various things that we strive for in our politics. And so that is why it is the first point of cutoff that is so often targeted, whether by these independent bodies such as the ADL in America, the ADC in Australia. I'm not sure what you guys have over there in New Zealand, but I'm sure there's something similar. Or whether it's the social media companies themselves which seek to silence people. For example, Facebook was very notorious for this. I don't know if that's changed in recent history. Zuckerberg seems to have undergone a political shift, but I doubt he's gotten much better on that topic. Or whether it's these governments that constantly try to censor what people say, rounding up people who put up stickers on lampposts if they dislike the message in the UK, or post something controversial online, or over here in Australia where they're trying to impose nationwide standards. For a long time, we've had the racial vilification laws on the books, the 18C, which has banned people from making things which, saying words which might be deemed offensive by the various minorities within our country. And I think that whether you agree with the speech being said, and oftentimes we on the right wing do, or whether even if you disagree, maybe you're more libertarian minded, I think that we must ensure that we have the freedom to speak these ideas, and for that reason, we must absolutely oppose any sort of limit put on speech in this country, short of maybe violent speech, something like that. That doesn't really benefit anyone. But nonetheless, we need to, as absolutely, with all the force we can muster, push back against any sort of censorship legislation, which brings me on to the other three bills, and I can run through those quickly if you guys are interested, or maybe we've labored this topic a little bit and we can move on to something else.
We'll go over the other bills quickly because it is important.
Yeah,
I'll rattle them out. So I wrote an article, and if anyone wants to read more, sure. So we've got probably the next big one, which is coming up, and which looks like it is going to pass, unfortunately, because it has bipartisan support from both major parties, and that's the under 16s social media ban, which will, sorry, I've got a cold, which seeks to ban kids under the age of 16 from all social media. Well, most social media. There are a couple of exceptions, and
Well, if they're using porn
ostensibly,
sites, they're fine. It's like,
yeah, well, yeah.
yeah.
Um, ostensibly this is for the purpose of protecting kids, and some of the reasons listed, I mean, you can sort of read into them what you will, but they're to stop body image problems among girls or misogyny, which, I mean, in other words, is sort of, I think, pretty transparently meant to target the rise of these pro-male influencers online, Andrew Tate being the most famous, but there's a whole slew of them these days. And they're basically encouraging boys to stand up for themselves, to represent their own interests, to go to the gym, and not be complete. What's on? I don't know what I can say on
Pushover or
YouTube,
soy
but
boy.
we'll say pushover.
Yeah.
We'll say pushover. Um, but yeah, so and yet the government wants to jump in, and they first of all they start off with a big ad campaign throughout the year, which shows a young boy being radicalized by these influencers online, and becoming more extreme. And I think that they have tried to pin domestic abuse on these pro male influencers, which is
Yeah,
pretty
okay. I
ridiculous.
mean, it's not because people are drinking and taking drugs and like beating their
And
misses.
well, you know what's even funnier is that, well, it's not funny. It's deadly serious. But most domestic abuse in Australia, or the group with the highest domestic abuse rate, and I'll let you guys guess it. Who do you think it is in
Oh,
Australia?
Aborigines probably by a large margin.
By a large margin. The rest of the groups pale in comparison with Aborigines, and there are, I think, various other minority groups are also up there. But yeah, so
Yeah, white men
this
are
is,
basically at the bottom. I mean, it's the same here.
yeah, although I'm sure it does happen, maybe low class whites are doing it and things like that. What I don't think is going to change this is the various attempts that have been made to basically cut the balls off boys in high schools. For example, they have educational systems, so programs, sorry, not systems, which seek to teach boys not to abuse women. I don't think that that has ever prevented a single abuse case. I don't think a boy is going to watch that and think when he grows up, you know, I was going to beat my wife, but I remember what I learnt in year 7, which is beating your wife is actually wrong. What is it? It's Aboriginals out in the outback that are like beating their wife senseless, and then when they get taken to court, they get out because they don't want to increase the proportion of Aboriginals in prison, so that their sentence is lowered and they're let out earlier. So it's honestly it's I mean, it's been said before, a narco tyranny where you're targeting the civil proportion of the population and completely holding them down for the ills of this untamed minority faction underclass, which is allowed free reign to do what they want and to wreck society. So that's the under 16s bill, and that's the reasons behind it. The only way it can be implemented, and I know you guys talk about this maybe a little bit more than I do. I'm not so much into the whole digital ID issue. It's not a big focus of mine, but I think it is relevant here. Is that the only way to institute that is by using UK-style biometric scans? Apparently, that's been implemented or tested in the UK before. And or second to this, or in conjunction with this, a government-issued digital ID, something like that, which I think is a terrible idea. Specifically, I think it's terrible, something that all Australian dissidents must oppose, because what it's going to do is it's going to link your ID to any social media you use, and it will make it easier for either vigilante hackers or potentially people suing you through the legal system. It will make it very easy for them to expose the identity of anyone that they dislike online. And if that is because of their political views, it'll be they'll have all the more reason to try and out them. So I oppose it for that reason, and also I don't think that it is beneficial for the government to have a log of everyone who is using the internet and what they're doing, what they're typing, what their thoughts are, and so I think that it needs to be opposed, even though maybe in an ideal world we could ban kids from using social media. I think it has done a lot of harm. At the same time, let's not pretend like all of the problems to the government haven't come from young guys getting on the internet and, you know, making memes. Is this part of the motivation for the government wishing to ban them from the internet? I wouldn't be surprised. And the fact that it's got bipartisan support only lends credence to that idea for me. But do you guys have anything to add on that?
Is there any opposition to this bill? Is like the Green Party, the One Nation, are they opposing
I
it?
know One Nation, I think One Nation will be opposing it. Greens, actually, I haven't looked into much, but it's sort of irrelevant because with both major
Yeah.
parties going in for it, there's just a tiny percent chance it gets chucked out.
No,
I
it's
think
basically
somebody
impossible.
calculated it's like
Yeah.
less than a 1% chance that it doesn't get through.
Yeah, you'd need like a rebellion in one of the parties for it to not get through,
Yeah,
which seems unlikely.
very unlikely. And I also do think that it probably might find some popularity with parents. That's how Albanese has been selling it. He's saying it's coming up to Christmas time. We want families to be spending time with each other, not on their devices. And so I think that a lot of
Yeah,
families
okay.
might actually go in for it, not thinking about the broader consequences. I think it's
Yeah,
very
it's
targeted
about
towards the middle
Christmas. It's not
class.
just trying to ID
Exactly.
everyone using social media.
100%, yeah. So for that reason, yeah, we need to oppose it, although not much can be done at this stage. Social media companies are being given a year to implement it, so who knows, maybe something will change in the year's time.
What's
But who knows?
the penalty for not implementing it? So let's say, for example, I don't know, like X doesn't want to do it. Like, do they get fined 5% of their revenue again? Like, what's the deal there? Or is that not clear yet?
Oh, hello.
Oh, we might have lost John
Sorry,
again.
I'm here. Did I cut out?
Yeah.
Oh, you're
I
back.
muted myself, I think. But whatchamacallit, what was I saying? So yes, I think it will be a financial penalty. I don't know if we have the details on it yet because that's still being brought out, even though it's going through Parliament, I think as we speak, or you know, as it's in the next week or so. And even until very recently, they haven't been properly nailing down details on how it's going to be implemented, whether it's going to be a digital ID, whether it's going to be some sort of a scan. They haven't given us proper details on that, and yet it's already gotten bipartisan support, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Wow. What the heck? Why is it So, why do you think that is?
I think it would be controversial. I don't know if that people like the idea of having to sign up to use anything online
Oh, right, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
with
Right,
their driver's license, for example. I don't think that that's going to be a popular idea at
right,
all.
right, right. Gotcha.
Yeah, having to
Gotcha.
link
Yeah.
your driver's license to your X, to your Facebook, to your
Yeah.
YouTube, whatever.
That's totally insane. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it is just. I mean, let's call it for what it is. I mean, they want to crack down on people. It's just what it is, and they want to police the because in the real world it is kind of true. You can't say anything at work. There's certain things that you may hesitate saying to certain people IRL in real life, and maybe even to family members. So, but the online it is sort of like the new public square where you can just say whatever and truly express what you want to all these people. So I mean, it makes it a truly effective tool for people like us, and we've seen the sort of effects and the ramifications it has for the global far left, and that I mean, there's a lot of truth and weight to the fact that people saying we memed Trump into office in 2016, and I think they do notice the power of I mean, yeah, not just memes, but a whole lot of things. The content creation scene. It's turning
Yeah, well, it's more and more
people.
important as, especially again, young people are turning away from traditional media and being more involved with social media such as like YouTube, Facebook,
Mm,
X, that sort of thing. So it does
mm,
make sense that the powers that be are trying to regulate it, which I think, they've basically have been trying to do since, like, again, Trump got elected.
mm,
Well, if you depart from the mainstream narratives online, you basically immediately discover red pills that we would have been discussing in, much smaller circles back in the year since 2016.
Well, I mean,
Very
just,
recently,
yeah.
with the freeing up, for example, TikTok allows controversial content to be disseminated a lot more widely, even though they are censorious because of the nature of the medium. The short form content can blow up really quickly before it can get taken down. Similarly, with X going free speech, with Rumble putting a bit of pressure on YouTube to be free speech.
Hmm.
There's Kick, although that's a little bit here or there
It's more
in terms
yeah,
of
gambling,
its
isn't
free speech policy.
it? That's more
Yeah,
yeah.
it
gambling.
says they're going to shut down they're going to shut down right wing content. So look, it seems like there are a couple of options popping up, putting pressure on the mainstream to keep their market share by widening up what is allowed to be said on the platforms. And so for that reason, I think that the government has now found it has been put on their plate to regulate the speech because it's not really an option for social media companies anymore. And unfortunately, they've happily taken up that task and they're busy going about it. It looks like they're going to succeed, at least in the short term.
Jeez.
So I will move on to sorry, it's a bit grim, but I'll move on to the last two. These two have both been put forward by our Jewish Attorney General Mark Dreyfus. It's not his position isn't the Jewish Jewish Attorney General. It's it's Attorney General, and he happens to be Jewish, and he's been commenting on all the anti-Semitism breaking out in Australia.
Oh,
Mind you, whites, of course, have faced no criticism since the founding of Australia. We're reigning in power, and there is no criticism of us. Only
mm,
Jews are getting criticised. So thankfully, legislation is now being suggested to protect them. And the two pieces being put forward are an anti-doxing amendment, which might sound good on the surface, but I'll explain a bit more about it. And then there's an expansion of the anti-hate speech legislation. I don't know that that's as damaging to us as the first two pieces we've just mentioned before, but it is nonetheless an encroachment on speech, I think. It will be used to encroach on speech. Um, so, just on the anti doxing, this was brought about because 600 Jewish writers and artists, creative types, were doxed and their chat logs were doxed from a WhatsApp group in which they were talking about various ways that they were going to try and pressure media individuals to take a favorable view on the Israel Palestine issue since since the invasion on October 7th. And so that was actually doxed, I believe, by left-wing individuals. And so these laws have been put forward to basically inhibit actual legitimate journalistic inquiry into these topics and try to shut that down. Mind you, and I'm sure you guys, this is the first thing that comes to your mind, right-wing individuals have not been protected in any way, shape or form by the government since we've been getting doxxed in recent times on social media. We've been, I mean, it's the countless number of people that have been had their identity exposed, their lives blown up because of their politics. You probably can't even quantify, but there are certainly numbers of them around the world. I mean, in Australia, I'm sure there are smaller numbers, but nonetheless, right wingers have never been protected from doxing, whether it's their address being shared or anything like that. It's been celebrated right across the board. So for that reason, I don't think that this is going to be what people think it is. It's not going to protect us from being doxxed. Maybe it will inadvertently, but it will also block journalistic inquiry into some of these more controversial issues. It'll give these activist groups teeth in order to go after journalists, I believe, legally. And then I'll just mention on the hate speech one, this is an expansion of the laws which banned the Roman salute earlier, or maybe more
Yeah.
commonly known as the Nazi salute. It also banned flags such as the Hamas flag, I think the Hezbollah flag as well. And so it's this expansion is supposed to ban or prohibit more symbols. So I don't know that that will necessarily practically impact us, only that I'm sure it can be creatively used by activist legal groups in order to target individuals who are dissenting from
Well, it's a slippery
mainstream
slope,
narratives.
right? It happens every
100%, yeah.
every time they go, "Oh, we just want to censor the Nazis. Don't worry about it." Then it turns out they basically just censor everyone. Like
I
pretty much
agree.
every time this has
I'm pretty
happened.
free speech absolutist in terms of political communication. Within reason, no violence. I don't think that that
Well,
needs
I
to
think
be
that's
allowed.
reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but any sort of legitimate political speech must be guaranteed. Even though I'm not a libertarian, I do take that position because I think that this is a little bit Ben Shapiro of me, that our ideas will win out in the end. I think that we're correct, and so given free reign,
Yeah.
our ideas are the most potent, they're most correct, and so for that reason, they'll outcompete all the others. Given the ability to be communicated without consequence or without fear of losing your job, your family getting pissed at you, these sort of consequences. So I do believe that we need to guarantee even supposedly controversial acts of political expression, such as the Nazi salute or various other symbols. Now, in terms of terrorist groups, I think that you can ban that. I mean, that doesn't really bother me very much. But if it's that, I don't think it's going to be that narrow in terms of what it bans, especially because it's an expressed expansion on the earlier laws put in this year to
Yeah,
ban
which already
symbols.
banned. Well, I mean, banned terrorist organizations like, symbolism from ISIS or Hamas, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's like next they'll just be like, oh, we're going to ban, this symbol that's apparently associated with nationalism, or like this symbol that's associated with, white identitarianism. And it's basically just going to continue and continue because this is the way it always works.
They're constantly redefining freedom, but it always suits them to what they want to achieve, and it's this redefining of freedom that really has to be considered by us and wake people up to that, because people might not be so clued in as to understand what's really happening with that tech bill and stuff like that. So yeah, it is. I mean, eventually, I would say that we do need to you know some of these groups that are very anti-freedom, and I'm talking about real freedom, not not being able to have child tax credits for dogs or gender affirming care for refugees and migrants, but it's of course that goes without saying, but yeah, I mean we've got to be careful about how they pose what is I mean because there are slightly more subtle demonstrations of what they pose to us, but maybe that doesn't need to be said right now, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's like, yeah, it's clear it's coming from one direction,
Well,
and
it's also a
not the
shame that
ban.
like the Liberals and National Party in Australia are unwilling to put an opposition to these sort of laws. In
mm,
fact, they sort of encourage it as well. Um,
yeah,
while in New Zealand, it actually does seem, at least like from, ACT and Z First, are able to influence the National Party a little bit so they don't support hate speech laws, which we saw in like the last couple of years where all three parties said they would oppose such laws that were brought by Labor and even reverse them, which made Labor not even table them, which they were talking about doing like 2 or 3 years ago. So it is sort of interesting. Well, I mean, it's not really interesting. It's sort of like sad that in Australia they don't have this opposition on the right, where you have the Liberal
We
Party just
do, but
going,
they're so incompetent, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They're one nation, but they're so sclerotic at this point. I mean, they've got an aging voter base. They've failed to capitalize on the various right wing shifts happening around the world, in other countries, Europe, America, New Zealand, even, I'd say with New Zealand first.
yeah, with
And
NZ
so
first
they
and
haven't been
ACT.
able to actually effectively influence the Liberal Party.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's unfortunate
mm.
because I mean they've been in that state for ages, and it does make you think. Like I've heard people say, is it just an op to keep like nationalism permanently pressure valved in Australia? Because like Pauline Hanson has been basically exposed as incompetent, and it has been like that for basically 20 years. So yeah, it makes you think like, is it just like a Liberal Party op or something to have the One Nation be completely like
Functionally, that's the
completely
way it is.
dysfunctional?
But functionally, that's how it always ends up being, because these people who are the so-called right, no matter where it is in the world, again, these people who we everybody calls the so-called right in a country, they're not really right wing at all, are they? I mean, functionally, they are liberals, and I would even say far left liberals, like Joe Kent in the USA, who is sponsoring these basically communist ideas, but he's running as a Republican, which is meant to be like a center right party. And we're getting the same sort of. It's too conflated with left wing ideas to really practically be of any use to nationalists, or just having a functional country that pushes back against these things. And then I don't have any confidence in these, this kind of brand or wave of milk toast conservatism. It's we need to do better. And it's all the more reason to group up, organize with sensible people, and I stress the word sensible people who have their stuff together, to actually really pressure these people who to make sure that they over deliver. Pressure them to over deliver, not just say things and then they don't do anything. This is the same sort of theme that every country is experiencing, with conservatives and with the center right, is that they say stuff that sounds nice, but they're not. And even a lot of the stuff they say isn't actually. It's not on. I mean, when I hear David Seymour talk, it's like, okay, but what is and Chris Luxon? It's like, what are we doing here? A lot of Kiwis have been deluded into thinking like Luxon and Seymour are like right wing nationalists, or that they're the real answer, they're the real solution to sort everything out. And it does seem that way, but everything they're talking about really isn't.
Especially
It's
Luxon.
really
I
not the
mean,
focal point of
yeah,
it all. And it's like we need to actually refocus the. I hear all these New Zealanders, and whatever percentage of these New Zealanders have a nationalist sentiment who voted for these two guys. It's sort of like, well, we need to kind of refocus the discussion on what we're all really angry about. There's too much immigration. There's too much, government meddling in the affairs of everyday New Zealanders and Australians. We just went through a horrible kind of like Stalin-esque sort of crackdown on freedoms and liberties recently, which none of them have publicly acknowledged. Where we still have these bills coming out, like technocracy bills, saying oh, you've got a techno-communism, you've got to sign up with your driver's license, your passport, what have you. You got to sign up your cat and your dog. And it's just like, yeah, this is kind of the thing. It's just simply it's not good enough, and there needs to be a concerted effort to pull these people in, or outright stamp these people out. If they really are like that guy Joe Kent, and there are other people like him, like Susie Wiles, who's part of Trump's cabinet, and Chris Lasavita as well. And if we have the same thing in New Zealand, New Zealand's full of them. The only people who have any genuine sort of nationalist sentiment, or at least, this is where I interestingly get a lot of pushback. But yeah, is NZ First. They are at the very least approximate to nationalist direction. Certainly, I would say that's quite clear given their history.
yeah.
So I would just say that. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to, because while we're on this thing, while we're on this topic, I thought we should actually go into if John could actually explain for like 5 minutes of why One Nation just is like sucks. Like, we sort of went over it, but I'm like, oh, maybe some of our listeners don't even know really what One Nation is. So if you could just explain that, John, that would be good.
Yeah, I can explain that, and maybe we'll start to wrap up after this with maybe I'd like to hear a little bit about New Zealand first and their prospects. So it's a good topic to end on. I think we can we're talking about what's to come and what our current options are. But yeah, One Nation. I suppose the reason they're so disappointing is because of the potential that they held at the beginning, the promise that they made to Australians when they first started out. When Hanson made her maiden speech in Parliament, I think it was in 1992. And she said that we were being flooded by Asian immigration and it was changing Australia irreparably into a country that we no longer recognize. And she made some other very strong statements after that. She actually was thrown in prison because of claimed electoral violations shortly after that. Actually, that was facilitated by members of the Liberal Party. Tony Abbott famously was involved in that, and that was working for John Howard. Howard, who was the Liberal Prime Minister at the time, who was running for election, he actually needed to compete with One Nation a little bit because of this rhetoric that they were putting out, the popularity initially garnered. And so he had to shift a little bit to the right in terms of his rhetoric, unfortunately, not in actual policy. And so he hawked a lot about refugees coming into Australia and turning away the boats. That worked to make him seem more right wing to the electorate. And unfortunately, he soaked up a lot of right wing energy because of that back into the Liberal Party. And mind you, this is a little bit of a digression, but he admitted the largest amount of migrants and in proportions from the third world, well, not the third world, but non-white countries, non-Western countries, out of any prime minister before him. And since then, it hasn't really changed. So he set a precedent in that, supposedly as the really right-wing, border hawking prime minister. But that's a digression. I'll go back to One Nation. And Hanson went to prison. She was actually released because they found the charges against her weren't, they didn't really have a basis. And so she went on. And then as time went on, they garnered a lot of initial success. They won 25% of Queensland's state election vote count in the state election following her announcement of the party, the founding of the party. And since then, they've never risen to those heights again, unfortunately. It's been a slow decline for One Nation. They lost a lot of their great talent. First, it was David Oldfield, who was the co-founder of the party. And I don't know that he was necessarily more right-wing than Hanson, but first of all, he was a man, so he was just by nature more competent than her. And so his departure left it basically solely in her hands. And unfortunately, we all know what women's leadership is like. And then
that needs to be said, by the way. That's so true.
Especially New Zealanders, right?
Oh,
you've had what's her name for how long?
But we've had Jenny Shipley, Helen Clark, and Jacinda. So all three.
Jacinda, that's the one. So you guys are well familiar with that. But then she's in recent history had a lot more departures from the party, including this is very recent history. This is skipping a lot of time. You had Craig Kelly, who was a former member of I think it was the National Party, but the Liberal Party. But he was probably one of the more right-wing members within the party. And he departed during the whole COVID thing. Then he went to run for UAP, which was basically centered around soaking up COVID discontent, and didn't actually succeed in electing anyone bar one seat. And so that was a failure. He's then went on to join One Nation, and he was doing good work there. He was he was using explicitly. Actually, I don't know if I should say it on YouTube because I've noticed my videos decline when I mention it. But he was talking about replacement, and I won't say too much about that.
Yeah,
in very explicit terms, actually. I don't know if he knew the content of what he was saying was so radical, but yeah, he was posting about that. And then he had a falling out with Pauline Hanson. She runs the party like a dictator, mind you. She doesn't allow anyone more talented than her to rise through the ranks and achieve success. And so he departed. She lost Mark Latham. Latham was very popular with, I'd say, probably the right wing, people who would ordinarily vote for Liberal because he had that sort of middle class battler sort of appeal. He was formerly the leader of the Labor Party, mind you, so extreme political acumen. He was a very principled guy. He was well spoken. He appeared on radio conversations all the time, and he left the party out of frustration. And there have been various other people who have left, so they have no ability to hang on to talent. In fact, many have speculated, and I think this has been shown to be true, that Pauline intentionally forces out anyone that challenges her rule within the party. And she's got her second in command, whose name is escaping me right now, but he's a out and out homosexual.
Not Malcolm
Oh,
Roberts.
jeez.
No, well, so Malcolm Roberts is probably the only talented guy that she has left, but unfortunately, he's getting on in age. He's had some good posts recently, but I will also include it in all of this. Mention that since her initial founding, since she talked about the being swamped by Asians, Australia that being, um, she has only gotten more and more watered down and moderate in her rhetoric and in the policies that she pushes. The party still claims to push for net zero immigration, although they don't talk about it as much anymore. They've really tried to go in on that boomer COVAX sort of a thing, digital IDs, all these sorts of side quests, and forgotten the main reason why people supported them in the first place. And unfortunately, a lot of people who aren't very tapped into politics and show up to vote once every 4 years, well, for federal, but I mean, we have elections more regularly than that. But people who show up to vote every so often, they're not really paying attention. They still think that One Nation represents them as right wing, popular. Well, I wouldn't say anyone identifies as populist, but anti immigration Australians. But unfortunately, that has long ceased to be the case. And so we hope for the speedy decline of One Nation into complete irrelevance, and hopefully the rising up of a new alternative who will be able to actually represent nationalist opinion within the country and give an honest defense to it. Unlike Pauline, she's become a grifter, unfortunately, and it's done. It really is. She should not be remembered as doing any good because what she has done for the country has squandered a lot of potential, unfortunately.
That's right. You should still like keep attacking these people. You know, like I was saying, like with U.S. politics, like um, Joe Kent and all these kinds of like grifty types, like who have their own agenda. You need to attack these people, and you need to like display it. That's what our enemies do very well, is they make a public show of someone, and it sounds very mean. It sounds very nasty. But these are kinds of the things that you need to advance people, or advance nationalism forward as the far left advances communism forward, as they they display it's very wise. They display, they show who their friends are and who their enemies are, and it's very important to make that to get it very clear who your friend and who your enemy is, because if you don't get that, then it's all just a big a big morass of confusion and muck, and you get people saying one thing over there and one thing over here, and you can never quite coordinate into something you know um, something effective, something that actually works. So I think everybody gets that, but yeah, I fully agree with that sentiment there. So that's really important to do. So yeah. Do
I
you
have
see?
to jet
Oh,
off very quickly. Sorry to interrupt, but
hmm.
could I just hear what's the prospects for New Zealand first before I go, and then you guys can keep going if you want after I leave.
Do you want to go, Gil? You go first.
Okay, so the question was, what are the prospects for New
Yeah,
Zealand
like
first?
what are the thoughts on New Zealand first? He gave us the thoughts on One Nation, so
Yeah, sure. I've always been very bullish on New Zealand first. I think this stuff is, people always want to say they want it to be 100% their thing, but look, it's politics. It's never going to be 100% your thing. And in terms of New Zealand first, I'd say they're actually pretty damn good, especially considering the amount of strain and struggle that they have been under. I mean, they have been attacked ruthlessly for the best part of like 20 years by the New Zealand media and by all the left wingers and stuff like that. I mean, it's been pretty brutal for them, but they have really hung on, and they've stayed the course for so much time, and they do have a strong base of support. They didn't do as well as I thought they might do. I liken that to the fact, ironically, and kind of unfortunately, that a lot of these disparate, separate kind of groups came about as a result of the tyrannical COVID, you know, crackdown situation on our rights, on our sovereignty, and that
Yeah.
that caused a lot of strange kind of people to just sort of rise up in their own little groups
And then run
and
away like as soon as they lost. So they obviously weren't like very.
exactly.
They weren't in it. They weren't in it for the long haul because as soon as they lost one election, they just slid away and disappeared.
Yeah, they just sort of sucked all the votes away from New Zealand First, what would normally go to them. And New Zealand First was very good. I felt on this issue that they were a lot of them are still like Tanya Unkovic is continuing to speak out about the COVID situation when no one else will. None of them, say a peep when asked about it. They just go, nah, we're not going to do anything. Who cares? Or they'll spout some complete, you know, Marxist drivel or just some complete hogwash, and so that's kind of the state of it. But I'm very bullish on New Zealand First. I've always liked Winston Peters myself. I like I do. It's interesting. Shane Jones comes from leftists can turn into right wingers. That does happen. Um, okay, needless to say, I like Shane Jones. I think this is the party of the future if we are to survive as New Zealand. I think it's so clear cut, and like what Hector and I want to do is we want to try and encourage people to support NZ First because they're the only serious, viable party who could potentially actually or who by far have the best chance at the restoration of New Zealand as it originally was. So I'm trying to really rally support for them, and yeah, that's I'll let Hector say. I've said too much. Hector, you go, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, New Zealand First, again, they're not perfect. They do have flaws. In the last election, their main flaw was, just not talking about immigration. Yeah, I mean, there's the argument. I've talked to people from within the party, people who are adjacent to the other parties, and they go, oh, it just wasn't on people's minds at the time. It was after COVID. Because COVID finished and there was no immigration at the time, but it's like there was already signs back in 2019, 2020. Oh, sorry, not 2019, 2022 and 2023 that immigration was about to ramp up again, which it absolutely has.
Mm.
So it was sort of a disappointment to not see any sort of rhetoric from New Zealand First on immigration last election. It does seem like the flood of like non-white immigrants in New Zealand isn't anywhere near as bad as it is in Australia and like Canada. It's definitely not perfect, but it's not on that like insane level.
The
So
Pajit menace.
yeah,
That should be a whole topic in
yeah,
itself. Why is it just the Pajit?
yeah,
The
and
onslaught of Pajites. I want to have a topic
yeah.
about that one. Go ahead, Hector.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll just say there has actually been some sort of promising rhetoric from both Shane Jones and Winston Peters on, Indian mass migration, which is good.
Yeah.
So hopefully it becomes, if it's like not a topic next election, I'll probably start becoming a bit, a bit bearish on NZ First if they don't talk about immigration in the next like year or so. So I think there's a bit like there that they definitely need to improve on. But internally, a lot of their other policies are quite good with, Marston Point actually utilizing New Zealand's resources like gas and oil and coal and gold and silver and copper instead of just going, oh, we'll just plant a pine tree here and then we're fine.
And rely on China for
Yeah,
coal.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right,
So,
totally ridiculous. Totally giving money to our enemies who wish
yeah.
us the very worst.
So, I mean, yeah, they're pretty good on like most policies. I would say, yeah, they're definitely better than One Nation by far. They actually do have some like fairly good people in there. And I think Winston Peters is miles above Pauline Hanson as like a
Yeah, yeah,
politician and a
yeah.
statesman.
You know,
So
he calls out the he is good. I like Winston. He calls out he's for a economically and sovereign nation, and historically they've been very strong on immigration, with the exception of this last election cycle, which is interesting. But needless to say that, and Shane Jones has recently expressed his concern, his great concern over it, even though they didn't really run on that.
yeah,
And then what's interesting, Winston Peters is an outsider, I believe. He calls out the Ukrainian genocide being engaged by Russia, while also calling out Israel
Yeah,
or
which
the
is
genocide,
rare.
which
It's
is
sort of rare for these right-wing populists. Most of the time, they like shill for Israel or shill for Russia for some reason, and stuff I don't really understand. So he does seem good on that. So I'd say
that's a good
while
sign.
while NZ First isn't perfect, I'd say it's probably better than most of these right-wing populist parties in the Anglosphere. I'd say it's probably better than Reform, much better than One Nation, better than the People's Party of Canada. So I mean, they're not perfect, but they're fairly good.
They seem much closer to the European right. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, they seem a lot closer to many of these European right-wing parties, nationalist parties that have popped up than they do to the grifter boomer parties that exist in the rest of the Anglosphere. At least from my opinion, from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually quite like a lot of these parties in Europe, like the ADF, Freedom Party of Austria. Then NZ First, if NZ First is on a Freedom Party of Austria level, that'd be pretty good. But they're not quite there yet. But I think they're on the right direction, which is good.
Would you say that they've got are they winning over young people? Are they going to carry the
Yeah.
party forward to that point?
They do have flaws in their party organization, which hopefully get solved. But it's not like One Nation where there's literally like no branches, from what I've heard, and you just can't organize on a local level. They do have some internal problems, which hopefully get solved. But from what I hear, like their youth wing is probably like one of the most active among political parties. Probably the only one that's more active is probably the Greens. So
their media campaign has gotten really good as well.
yeah,
They've started
they probably have the
media.
best online media of any party.
That's another reason why I draw the similarity. I remember reading an article just after they got into government in the most recent election, and yeah, they were commenting on the media work that had been done, and it reminded me of the European parties more so.
Yeah,
they may have their problems, but we're gonna solve those problems.
Hopefully they get solved.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully there's pressure within the party and pressure without the party that pushes New Zealand First in the right direction. And there's a much higher chance of this happening in New Zealand First, and basically there's zero chance with One Nation, where it's basically impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
All
100%. Well, just to finish up, maybe tie the topics together. One of the stated reasons why the misinformation bill was actually drafted, and this was within the media rundown that was released alongside the bill in Australia, was that they wanted to prevent the rise of a party like the AFD in Germany in Australia. So
insane. It's
they
just
actually
like
said
political.
that.
They explicitly, I can show you the article, and they explicitly said that was one of the reasons why that they wanted to prevent free speech being completely free in Australia, which is absolutely wild. But I think it also it means that both we and the left wing, we have the same analysis. We're looking at the same data and we're coming to the same conclusions. The only difference is they're cynically saying, no, we need to oppose this, we need to shut it down. Whereas we're saying this is a good thing, we want to encourage it. And then you sort of have the centre right, which they're faffing about doing their own thing with their own analysis, which doesn't always make a lot of sense. But it definitely is something that I think is being feared by a lot of Western governments. And I think that is a great sign for us that it is a practical and productive route to go down in terms of our political engagement. We need to be looking to creating these very, what would you even say, active, I'd say, is the best word to describe it, parties and organizations which represent our nations in their actual essence. Unlike some of these other conservative parties, which talk about the idea of being an Australian, the piece of paper that makes you an Australian, or New Zealand in New Zealander in that case, but actually want the actual Australians, the founding stock that created our countries. And I suppose we have very similar founding stocks. I think we have more so the convict gene in us, but nonetheless, we're both descended of the British Isles, and for that reason, I think that they are very fearful that those same people that founded the country, and by they I'm referring to the mainstream parties and various organisations which constitute our current political constellation, they're very fearful of a force that genuinely and without any sort of playing any of the stupid games that the other parties play, just represents the people that live in our countries and represents their interests. So maybe I'll leave you guys with that and you can wrap it up. I'm happy to hear what you have to say in response.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's sort of what you want to see from these political parties. You don't want them to just exist during election time. You want these parties to be
Mm.
vehicles, basically for discourse, for activism, for organizing just in the day-to-day political sphere, which is why actually these parties in Europe have been so successful. I mean, ADF and Freedom Party of Austria, the Swedish Democrats, they have like meetings every day. I mean, maybe not the same branch every day, but they have regular meetups. They engage in activism. They engage in political discourse in the day-to-day. While in the Anglosphere, our parties, especially our like right-wing parties, just seem to come together at election time, then fade away, which is sort of
That's right.
annoying. I don't know why they keep doing this, and then surprised that the left seems to be out organizing them in like every
Mm.
single capacity. While in Europe, it's the complete opposite. Like in terms of party membership, the Freedom Party of Austria has like 4 times more party members than any other party, I believe, in the country. So it's basically like it's
Also,
basically
look at the voter demographics that they're winning.
Hmm.
They're winning disproportionately younger
Yeah,
voters compared to the other parties.
and as is true with Germany, in Sweden, in France, like the younger people are right wing and they're more engaged on the day-to-day level. And these right-wing parties are really benefiting from that. While in the Anglosphere, they haven't really been able to grasp this concept of having, a grassroots, sort of young political activist class like they have
Mm,
in Europe.
Well, I think the reason why is because anyone that's young and involved in right wing politics, apart from obviously those who are looking for a job in the mainstream, they're all just they're so much more radical than what currently exists. And if you give them free reign, which is necessary if you want to develop an organic, youthful culture that's going to drive the party forward, it will run outside the bounds of allowed ideological speech. And so for that reason, they really have to keep a tight rein. The boomers have to strangle any sort of life within the party before it can even begin if they don't want to be attacked by the media. But that is so necessary. We need to go through attacked by the media, their attack proven wrong.
Well,
Yeah,
that's the thing. Being
I
attacked by the
hear
media should be a
the
badge of honor,
generation.
right?
yeah, we need to make it so.
Yeah. Oh, you're
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
cutting out there, John. Sorry. Can you repeat that last couple of sentences?
yeah. Yes, please.
Well, just that the older it's like this older generation that let the younger guys rise up and take the reins. They're they've got a death grip on the existing institutions, and beginning new institutions is a very long battle.
Mm,
So I think that's one structural problem that we have is that we're not getting a lot of intergenerational right wing happening in our countries. It's sort of every generation has to restart again, and hopefully, well, look, I will say that we have the benefit in Australia. We've had the British Australian community, which has actually represented a passing down of the identitarian torch from an older generation. You have Dr. Frank Salter, you have Harry Richardson, onto a lot of younger guys, and empowering them to represent their people in a practical and sensible way. And I think that this is also the case in the Homeland Party in Britain, and I'm sure this is
Hmm.
also the case with other similar parties. But you've got Kenny Smith, who's more of a middle-aged guy. You've got some of their candidates who are a little older, and then you have you've got a glut of younger people. They said something like 3/4 of their membership are Zoomers, I think, something like
And
that in a
which
recent
party was this? Homeland.
announcement. The Homeland
Yeah,
Party in
yeah,
the UK, which is an
yeah,
explicitly nationalist party. They talk about sensible nationalism,
yeah.
and
I
they've
like the Homeland Party. I mean, hopefully it pushes these other parties like the Conservatives and Reform into the right direction. So,
mm, yeah, yeah. Capture the youth. Constant
I
pressure.
agree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Capture the youth. Constant pressure.
Yeah,
Constant
we look forward
organize. Go ahead, John.
to the success, hopefully.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
you sort of cut
yeah,
out there a little bit, but I got the gist of what you're saying. It's the
yeah,
Australian
yeah.
internet, I think.
Yeah, maybe got a wallaby swing from the power lines or something. Yeah, or the internet cables. But yeah, it's yeah, organization. Everybody needs to get involved. Everybody needs to go all in. Like people may make fun of various said groups for whatever reasons, but one thing about them is that
Can you hear me?
however, yep,
Yeah, we
can
can hear
hear
you.
you. Yeah. However silly they may seem, they are politically engaged and they are prepared to fight and fight effectively, no matter how silly what they believe in is. So yeah, just organizing, getting people involved, becoming active in your sort of in the political community, getting to know people, and it can be hard. Like I understand, like the guy again, another U.S. example, John McEntee. He was a Trump loyalist. He was for Trump from the very get go. And how did he get into where he's corresponding with Trump personally? Get filling out files for him and giving him documents and stuff, and having a personal relationship with him. He just he didn't know anybody in that scene in the Trump movement. He basically just spammed them with emails saying, "Hey, I support what you're doing. I'm fully on board with it. How can I help? What can I do?" And he just kept sending emails out, calling them, trying to make contacts and stuff, just really harassing them. And he is where he is today, where he's prominent figure in the Trump movement, and he's very popular amongst the youth, and he's doing a really great
Yeah.
job, and he's based. So I mean, it's just like our time is now. We need to get involved. We
Yeah.
need to just do it, and it has to happen. So
Yeah.
let's do it. Okay, I think he gapped it.
Yeah, I think he's gone. So I guess we
Yeah,
should probably wrap it up.
yeah.
Thanks for John to joining us. Sorry to see you go. I don't know if he disconnected from his internet or he had other things to do.
Mm,
Thanks for joining you on. It was a great chat. I hope to have you on again and do some more of these Trans-Tasman talks.
yeah.
Maybe get a whole panel of Kiwis and maybe get like Gimpsey and Tim Wilms and all and like Blair Cottrell and De
We
Boer all on at
we
once
need
and have a grand like council of the Anzacs or something, which would be pretty funny.
That's
But
a good idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. Thanks for
But
joining us. Thanks for those listening in. Thanks for those that joined us on the Twitter space, and thanks for those watching the replay. Hope everyone has a great evening, and we hope you have a great week. We are going to take 2 weeks off because I'm going on holiday after pretty soon. So we'll do one more final stream of the year, like year wrap up or something in mid-December.
mm.
So we'll
And then
do
after that, we got big guests. We
big
got big
guests. Yeah, they've
guests
been eating
coming
lots
up.
of donuts, lots of KFC. They're huge. They're absolute units. I'm
Yeah.
just kidding. No, but yeah, we got some real good guests lined up next year. So I hope everyone's doing great. Have a great evening, guys. And as always, stay blessed, not stressed. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Peace.